Hi, my name is Johnny Pollock and I'm the pastor of Calvary Church Loughrea, and today we're going to be continuing on in our series in the Word One-to-One. That's this little booklet that we have been going through each day as we walk through the Gospel of John together. Now, as I've said all the way through, and you can check through the video playlist that we have here, is that this is a great opportunity for us to read the Bible, to hear God's words, to see the life of Jesus and how it lines up with his teaching, and also to really investigate what he says and why this matters to us. You don't need a great background in reading the Bible or a great knowledge of the historical context just to read or listen to the words themselves, and that we can really weigh up the evidence to what Jesus says and how this could transform and affect our lives. Here is the copyright information for the Word One-to-One itself. You can see it has been published by 10ofthose.com, and indeed you can go on there or the Word121.com and get access to the resources. I've put the link below for the PDFs of the free copy of this course that we're going through, and you're more than welcome to go there and print them off, or indeed I'll have the slides up on the screen that you can read along with us. We're going to be in chapter 18 today, and as you'll see from the slide, it is about Jesus, the shepherd who calls his sheep. John chapter 10 we're in at the moment, verses 1 to 21. And as it says in John 10, there's lots of talk about shepherds and sheep. Sheep are used throughout the Bible as a picture of God's people. Shepherds are a picture of the leaders of God's people who rule and care for the sheep. Now, if we look back at the Old Testament, we can contrast Jesus' teaching with what the Jews already knew. We are looking at extracts taken from the book of Ezekiel and chapter 34. If you look at them here in verses 2b, the second half of verse 2, it says, "This is what the sovereign Lord says, Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock?" And then in verse 4, "You have not strengthened the weak, or healed those who are ill, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. And you have ruled them harshly and brutally." If we go on into the next slide, we'll be able to see verses 15, 16, and 22 of Ezekiel chapter 34. It says, "I myself will tend my sheep and make them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak, but the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. I will save my flock, and they will no longer be plundered. I will judge between one sheep and another." So God is referring to these shepherds, the leaders of the day, and he has an issue with them. Well, what is the issue? Well, pardon the pun, the shepherds are fleecing the sheep in verses 2 to 4. They're taking advantage of them. And so Ezekiel says God will be their shepherd. He will come and bind these false leaders, and he will take over himself. And so as we set the scene, and if we look back into the previous chapters, Jesus is still in the temple. The Pharisees had abused this man who was born blind in the last chapter. And Jesus' target now turns to the teaching about false shepherds who are standing right in front of him. They're saying, "You're blaming this man, you're chastising this man, you're not showing compassion about this man, you're not acting like the shepherds that God wants you to be." And so we're going to see Jesus debunk the old comment, "It doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're sincere in your belief." Instead, we'll see who and what you believe is actually a matter of life and death. And so as we begin in our next slide, we'll see at the beginning of John chapter 10, the shepherd and his sheep. "Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by the other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice." Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. So Jesus introduces 4 characters into these verses. The first is the thief and the robber and the stranger in verses 1 and 5. Then the shepherd in verse 2. Then verse 3 and 4, you have the gatekeeper. And then verses 3 to 5, we have the sheep. Now, as he introduces the characters, what does he tell us about the shepherd and the sheep? Well, the shepherd enters by the gate in verse 2. He calls his sheep by name in verse 3. He leads them out with his voice in verse 4. But the sheep, they listen to the shepherd's voice in verse 3. They follow him knowing his voice, verse 4. And they will not follow a stranger or a false shepherd in verse 5. So what about this man that we looked at in chapter 9 who was born blind? How did he show himself to be a true sheep? Well, he heard the voice of Jesus. He recognized Jesus as the true shepherd, and then he believed and worshipped Jesus. And so this idea of a true shepherd and false shepherds is something that Jesus is now going to look into in greater detail. And we'll see that as we look at verse 7 to 13. Therefore, Jesus said again, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All those who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep." Just like before, and we looked at Jesus saying that he was the bread and the blood. He looked at his body and his blood. He used these illustrations. As we said back then, as we looked at it, he wasn't saying his body was physically something that they would eat and his blood was physically something they would drink, but he's using these illustrations and pictures, and he's explaining what they actually mean here. He uses the shepherd and the sheep. He uses the wolf and the hired hand. He uses all of these pictures to help them understand what's happening. But his point is, how do we know a true shepherd from a false shepherd? How do we know someone who has a sincere care for the sheep and someone who is only in it for their own ends? Well, he tells us. The true shepherd is the gate for the sheep in verse 7. He saves and provides nourishment for his sheep in verse 9. He gives life to the full in verse 10. And he lays his life down for his sheep in verse 11. However, a false shepherd is a thief and a robber in verse 8. He steals, kills and destroys in verse 10. He does not own the sheep, verse 12, but runs away as soon as he sees danger, again in verse 12. And he cares nothing for the sheep in verse 13. Now, as we take this illustration and we put it onto the Pharisees, as we see in the story that Jesus is telling, in what ways have we seen the Pharisees in chapter 9 behave like this with a man who was born blind? Well, they couldn't care less for the man. They wanted to use his story to get at Jesus for healing him on the Sabbath. They wanted to kill Jesus, and they looked for evidence for that, and they used this man to do it. But secondly, their only concern is to protect their own position and status. They can't have Jesus telling people things that they don't like. They can't have Jesus leading them astray from where they want the people to be. And they can't have anyone that will be taking popularity and fame and position away from them. Now, we might be wondering, well, true shepherds, false shepherds, what has this all got to do with Jesus and indeed us? And we're going to see this as we look into verse 10 again. He says, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Now, what do we think Jesus would say to the person who said, look, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're sincere in your belief. There are lots of different religions, different opinions out there about Jesus. It doesn't really matter. As long as you're sincere and a good person, it doesn't really matter what or who you believe. Well, the truth here is we can be sincerely wrong. For example, as it says here, if you see children eating sleeping tablets because they sincerely believe they're sweets, you don't stand back because they believe they're not at risk. We don't say, well, look, that they just believe they're sweet, so let's go ahead and let them act this way. It doesn't matter what the child thinks, the tablets will ultimately kill them. And this matters here in this account because Jesus says false shepherds only bring death. They lead us down the wrong path. And how this is contrasted to Jesus, in verse 10, he says that he may come, that we may have life. The test, therefore, is who are we listening to? So how can we know if a leader or a world religion or philosophy is really from God? Well, do they bring salvation? Have they laid down their life for the sheep? Can he defend them against an enemy? And the truth is, no religious leader apart from Jesus has ever done this. They've given a list of rules and regulations, a path to follow, but none have ever brought salvation, laid down their life for another, and defended against enemies. And what does this tell us about religious leaders, even so-called Christian teachers, if they don't point to Jesus as Saviour? Well, if we go back and read verses 12 and 13, we'll actually see what happens. They're hired hands. They will run away when the going gets tough, and they are not true leaders. Now, in verses 14 to 18, Jesus demonstrates how he is the good shepherd. He says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheepfold. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it back up again. This command I received from my Father. So Jesus outlines how he is the good shepherd. So what are the qualifications? Well, verse 14, he knows his sheep and they know him. Verse 15, he knows his Father and the Father knows him. Verse 15 again, he lays down his life for his sheep. Verse 17, he is loved by the Father. Verse 18, he lays his life down voluntarily. Verse 18, he has also authority to take up his life again, i.e. to come back to life. And then finally in verse 18, he has authority from the Father. So Jesus is the only one able to give eternal life to his flock because he is the only one who has defeated death. And the consequences of this, in verse 14 or 15, that his sheep therefore can know him intimately. In verse 16, he brings sheep from other sheepfolds, i.e. he is not just the Saviour of the Jews, but of all mankind. And then verse 16, he unites the flock because the flock are united in him. And so Jesus is talking about uniting these sheep. He is uniting these people from all around the world, from all different tribes and nations and tongues and cultures that are united by putting their belief and trust in him and following him as their Lord and Saviour who has brought them life. However, in verse 18 to 21, we see that, well, the Jews are not happy with this. He says, no one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. The Jews who heard these words were again divided. Many of them said, he is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? But others said, these are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? So the Jews, some say, he's possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? Others said, look, I've seen what he's done. He's healed and helped this blind person. How could he be demon-possessed if he's doing so many good things? Now, we have a survey that had been conducted by a church with the following question. What do you make of the baby in a manger? 27% saw Jesus as an ordinary child around whom a myth basically developed. But 37% saw Jesus as an extraordinary child who went on to do great things, but met an untimely and tragic death. Now, verse 18 shows these views to be wrong. Maybe these are your views. It's Jesus, was a baby born and a big story has been built up around him. Or else, well, he was just a really good guy that ended up getting on the wrong side of some bad people who put him to death. Verse 18 says Jesus didn't lose his life. He gave up his life freely. It wasn't taken from him. He voluntarily gave his life for others. But our responses can be similar even today to the Jews. Some people will always think that following Jesus is ridiculous. And the Bible says they are spiritually blind. They will not follow the facts. And Jesus says they are not his sheep in verse 20. But others can understand the facts, can't deny them, and follow the good shepherd. They are true shepherd, or true sheep of the shepherd in verse 21. So that question does ring true as we think about how to summarize this and how we look at these verses as a whole. The question for you and for I is then, well, who will we listen to? We have come, many of us, looking for life, looking for answers, looking for truth. And Jesus says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And so Jesus brings this offer. He asks us to examine his word, his works, and his truth. And if we come to him, we can have life. And I pray for you and for me that this is something that we do, that as we continually walk through John's Gospel, that we will be examining the words of Jesus, examining the actions of Jesus, and examining this truth that he is outlining for us. And if you do have questions, please do get in touch either below the line here, or if you would like to in private or even over the phone, please do get in touch. I would love to walk through this with you to help you to see how the evidence of Jesus stacks up to the fact that he is God, he is a Saviour, he died on the cross for us, our sins, so that we can have a relationship with God, and how we can respond to him in worship and follow him with our lives. Next time, we're going to not be looking at the shepherd in Jesus, but we'll be starting to look at the sheep and what this means for you and I. So until next time, I pray that this will be helpful for you, that will be an encouragement for you, and that we will be transformed as a result of this wonderful good news. God bless.